All right, so here we are with an installment of what we call Peculiar People, which is what most of us are. I always say, let's embrace our weirdness instead of trying to be normal.
That's the beauty of God's creation. We're all peculiar.
Normal is boring. And who's really normal? But the idea behind it is, just interviewing people that have unique stories. And everybody has a story. And so often we learn maybe the pastor's story or some of the leader's story, or obviously celebrities and all that, but everybody has a unique story.
And sometimes we don't get to learn the story of the whole congregation because everybody has a story.
Right.
And everybody is interesting.
So, it was basically born out of the fact that as our church grew above my ability to know all of the people in the church, instead of being up front and praying for people, and that's beautiful and wonderful. I want to know the people, right? So we have people that pray for people. We believe in that. But I post myself outside, and I just stop people that I don't know and haven't gotten to know yet. I see their face, but I just don't know them. And I just ask them, what's your story? And I find there's amazing things about everybody.
And for me, it's something that just, as you're speaking, my journey became one of those people to being one of those people who are in front praying for other people.
Yeah.
That's
we're going to get into
journey.
that. Yeah, we're going to get into that. You're a prayer minister, which is relatively unique within a church, So the verse I base this on is out of the King James, because King James gives us just cool words sometimes. And so it's out of 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9, and it says, "But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that you should show forth the praises of him who has called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light." And so it's our uniqueness and God's gospel applied to our uniqueness that shows forth his glorious light, right?
It's what brings us into the light.
Yeah.
It's our peculiarities that God helps and uses us to get into the light, to know him, to become a true Christian.
Right. So in the verse, theologically, it literally means that you're different than the world. You're unique from the world. You are special, like the New King James and the NIV says. And so we are special people created by God to bring forth special things, not to be the same.
And I do believe that he has chosen everybody to do a special work. And it's up to the individual to surrender and say, okay, I'm going to take this path. I'm going to become one of those special people. I'm going to become one of those peculiar people. And I'm going to separate myself from the world,
I think also I forgot to introduce you. This is Alan Kruger. And anyways, we'll get more into your name, the uniqueness of it, the peculiarity of it in a minute. But I think also not just different from the world, but I think so often we look around and we have such a desire to fit in that very often we try to be like other people in the church instead of being what God created us to be, right?
He created us to be our own self, our own individual. Everybody has their own little ways, nuances, quirks, and that's what God appreciates about each one of us. He created us that way. He appreciates that we're different.
Yeah, nowadays it's almost like every city planner from across the country has taken every suburban city and made it look just alike.
Yeah.
How boring. And I don't think God's boring, and so he just creates us so unique. So anyways, Alan, your name, Alan Kruger. So tell us about your name and how it kind of doesn't necessarily fit into who you are.
No, it doesn't at all. And let me throw my middle name in. My middle name is Gennaro. Okay, so the Kruger part comes from my father, who was a German Jew. His family were Holocaust survivors, and they were pretty much. My father was pretty much well studied in the Old Testament and the Torah and the Talmud and all of the Jewish writings. And he was, I would have to say, pretty astute with it. My mother, her maiden name was Jessepina Briscoe. She was right off the boat from Sicily. How the two of them made that connection, I really don't know, but I just know that they were married 63 years and they had a great connection. So now my mother was a Roman Catholic, obviously Italian Roman Catholics. So the name Allen could be written two different ways. It could be A-L-L-E-N, which is Scottish, or it could be written A-L-A-N, which is a Jewish name. So I have the Jewish first name. To the Italian people, Saint Gennaro is the saint of the sickly children. And I was sickly as a child. I had a rheumatic heart. So that's how I get the Italian Gennaro middle name. And so it's been a strange combination, carrying that, through my life. It's strange that my father would have married outside of his faith. And it's strange that my mother would have married outside of her faith. Together, they both schooled me my mother schooled me as a Roman Catholic. My father schooled me as a Jew. And the most amazing thing is, I would have to say, by the time I was 16, my whole family got baptized as Christians in the charismatic Christian revival that they was having.
Oh,
this is
interesting.
Like in the mid to late 70s, 75, 76. And my mother went on to become a Sunday school teacher. My father went on to be an usher at the church, involved in all the men's Bible studies, all the things like we do here at Calvary Chapel. Yeah.
So, in full disclosure, Al and I have spent a lot of time on road trips together, and he speaks fluent Spanish, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I have bad teeth, and so I go to Mexico to get my teeth done, and these guys are great dentists. And so he would go with me on the drive. We just talk the whole way down.
Yeah.
And so I just listened to these stories of him growing up and all, and then he would, he'd kind of get me into Mexico and keep me safe, basically be my bodyguard. So we have a lot of stories behind
great
us.
trips, and we spent hours talking, hours speaking with each other, getting to know each other, and speaking theology.
Yeah. So growing up, so I grew up in Southern California, and so I was amazed to hear some of your stories about where you grew up and like what was your, primary language growing up, and then eventually how you learned Spanish later. And so just give some background on growing up in New York City.
Well, I grew up in a tough neighborhood in New York, East New York. And my mother, we lived with my Italian grandparents.
So East New York means what?
It's just a section of Brooklyn, so lower east side of Brooklyn.
Okay.
Right before you get into Queens, so, of the 5 boroughs. And back in those days, it was mainly Italian. A lot of mobster-type guys lived there. So I lived with my grandparents, my Italian grandparents, my parents. And my mother, my grandparents all spoke Italian. So that was the language that I heard growing up. So before I actually got to grade school and whatever, I knew pretty much fluent Italian and English. Because my father would speak, only with his brothers, they would speak Yiddish. But he wouldn't speak German. They would never use the German language. I guess after the Holocaust, they stuck to their Yiddish amongst the Jews in Germany. They called it the hidden language. That was just
So let's stop there, because a lot of people don't know the idea behind Yiddish. You know the idea behind the Yiddish language?
It's a melding of Hebrew and German.
So from what I understand, out of respect, because they weren't in the land, and out of respect for the biblical language of Hebrew and their history, that they're no longer there, they really allowed this to become their official language for many generations, right? Yiddish.
With the Orthodox Jews and Hasidic Jews, it's still their official language.
Oh, okay.
They speak Yiddish.
Now, going to Israel often and getting tour guides that are obviously Israeli, from what I understand, though, Yiddish itself has died in Israel proper because they have revived the Hebrew language. And it was a struggle, actually, to dig up pronunciations. And they're not even sure about some of the pronunciations even today, which is
as the older generation, passed on. A lot of the newer generation didn't want to learn the language, and those living in Israel had to learn proper Hebrew because most of the people in Israel speak proper Hebrew.
Right. So that's interesting. Anyway, so back to the story. So you learned Italian kind of as your first language, and your dad would speak Yiddish, and then you spoke English.
I spoke English, and growing up in New York, as the neighborhood started to change, a lot of immigrants and legal immigrants from mainly Puerto Rico would start moving into the neighborhoods, and they spoke a certain form of Spanish. I started to pick that up, and then in school you had to take a language. So I said, let me take this language. It's close to Italian. I speak it with some of the guys on the streets, and so I learned how to speak Spanish.
Yeah. So then, as a young man, at a certain point in your life, you met a young lady.
Yeah. Well, let's get this. This is very interesting. I had a friend who was from Egypt, and we worked together for many, many years. And he met a young woman from Mexico, and they got married. In the course of that time, he kept saying to me, "Oh, you got to meet my sister-in-law. You got to meet my sister-in-law. You got to meet my sister-in-law." And I would always tell him, "Manny, I'm good just the way I am. I'm happy, And then one day they, I think the term they used to use years ago was they shanghaied me. They had a little restaurant that they opened up, and they invited me over. And I didn't know that my wife, my Manny's sister-in-law, was here because she worked for the airlines, and she was in New York. And that's how I met my wife. And
so obviously your Spanish got a lot better at that point.
Yeah.
Well, it got a lot more Mexican.
Got a lot more Mexican. And well, through our rough times and our good times, 31 years we've been together. And sometimes my wife speaks Spanish at home to me. Sometimes she speaks English. Sometimes she doesn't speak at all.
So I always respect people that can speak, multiple languages. I mean, I've studied Greek and Hebrew, but I can figure it out on the page. There's no way I could pronounce it. And then I've been trying to learn Portuguese for decades.
It's the toughest language to learn.
And so but I think for some people it's easier. For me, I just get a mind block in that particular area. So let's go back to growing up in New York. So another thing interesting about Alan that just blows my mind is he is a chef.
Yeah, I worked my way through high school and college in a restaurant. I started out making pizzas and then cooking, making salads, doing all kinds of stuff in the kitchen, all the prep work. I like doing the prep work. Then I started working the line, cooking the entrees. Now I'm about, 19 or so, and I'm in college, and I wanted to be a lawyer. I was studying. I wanted to be a lawyer. It didn't go so well for me. Not the grades. It was the fact that I thought that law was justice. If you're just, and lawyers work for justice. And then I learned that lawyers, a lot of them, do it just for the money. And so I went to see my boss that I worked for, and his name was Salvatore Di Lorenzo. And I said, "Sal, I'm disillusioned about school right now. What do I do?" And he says, "Albie," he just called me Albie. He says, "You've been working for me since you're 13. You have your heart for the kitchen. You have a love for cooking. You have a love for the food. Why don't you pursue that?" I went to see a guy, a chef from Italy. His name was Nicole Scotto, and I became his apprentice. I worked with him for 11 years, and I did like a European-style apprenticeship. I didn't just learn the cooking, the butchering, and the fish filleting. I had to learn the culture of where the foods came from, where things, he would, as we were working together, he would just say to me, artichoke, what is it? And where did it come from? And I'd have to tell him, the thistle comes from Sicily, blah, blah, blah. Shallots, they're Persian. They're a mix of garlic and an onion. All the different, he had me learn the right stuff, all the right stuff. And then I ended up joining the American Culinary Federation. And as the years went by, I did this apprenticeship with him. And he was a chef at a very big restaurant in New York. And he had actually 3 apprentices, 3 guys that he was teaching. And he got very ill. And he couldn't work no longer. And I just stood up and did his job. Whatever, I knew all of his recipes. I just did his job. And the other 2 guys, one went to the owner and said, well, if you pay me, I'll work better. I'll do this. And the other one went to the owner and said, no, I don't want no responsibility. I don't want that. So I ended up working as the executive chef for about 2 years. And I never asked for a raise. I never asked for anything special. And then I tell you, it was my 30th birthday. The maitre d', who was a Greek guy, Stomatis Christis. He was a maitre d' on the cruise lines. He was just unbelievable. He hands me a box and says, happy birthday. In those days, we got out of work late. By the time I got home, and so I opened the box, and inside is a big wooden box with a ship's compass. It's a ship's compass. I called him up about 2 o'clock in the morning. I said, Tom, what is this? A ship's compass? I don't even own a boat. He says, it's to remind you that if you want to be the executive chef of the Westbury Manor, set your course. Don't let anybody put wind in your sails or take wind out of your sails. Remember the compass. And a few weeks later, I went out and I had a shirt, a chef's jacket made for me, embroidered with the Italian flag on the collar. My name, Alan Kruger, executive chef, the emblem of the Westbury Manor. And I went to work like a normal work, and I saw the eyes of people looking and staring. A couple hours later, the owner came in, just looked at me, shook his head, went up to his office. A little while later, I used to take a lunch break from 3 to 5. He got on the speakers all around the restaurant and said, I want everybody up in my office now. We all went up to the office. No one knew what it was about. And he just said, one of the apprentices was Steve, says, Steve, you said you didn't want the responsibility. Rosario, you wanted the money. But Alan did the job. He's now your boss. He's the executive chef of the Westbury Manor. And I worked there until I started with that company in 1979, and I worked for them until 2005.
So, like we're here in South Texas. I grew up in Southern California, one of many kids. And for me, food was survival because if you didn't eat it, you didn't eat kind of thing. And it's kind of still how I eat now. And I know you have this incredible respect for food. We've been on mission trips together where you were cooking the meals. Yes. And it's like, well, this mixes with this and this doesn't with this. And these are the reasons why. So it's so intricate. And there's so much that goes into it. Like you were saying, just the details of where things are from. And obviously you're better if you know it better. But tell me though something, because it is, I think it's different in South Texas. We're not so into cuisine unless it's, Tex-Mex or, Jalisco style or whatever. And Southern California just kind of has everything mixed together. But in New York City, like being a chef is like on par with being a celebrity. So tell me some about how much money is involved, how much like fight for control over restaurants and, maybe mafia connections. I don't know, but just,
The restaurant industry in New York is probably one of the number one money makers. It was at one time controlled by Italian people, Italian restaurants. We have a lot of Chinese restaurants. And then you had a lot of immigrants. So you have, Afghan restaurants, you have Persian restaurants, you have West Indian restaurants. And it's a big business. Chefs started to make big money, especially if you were worked at a big place, if you got yourself involved in competitions, if you got your name known for something you did, a special dish that you would make, and the money was very good.
Yeah, you had mentioned to me in one of our conversations about like menu preparation, like for multiple restaurants, and then even the catering side of it,
Well, eventually my boss went on to open and own 24 restaurants. At one point, he opened a chain of steakhouses, and I helped him research the way the certain steaks were cooked. I helped him research how to make a certain steak sauce. He would bring this stuff back to me, and he would say, reverse engineer this. And I would do it like a chemist, and I would make the different steak sauces, the different dessert sauces, the different veloutés. And so he opened up a chain of steakhouses. He has opened up 4 catering houses, 2 hotels, a bunch of high-end Italian restaurants, really high-end. And man, I worked with a gentleman. His name was Antonio Galante. He was a certified master chef from Avellino, Italy. He was crazy. He was an alcoholic. But I learned so much from him. He knew everything. And I was actually his boss, but I stayed in his back pocket because I wanted to learn. And eventually, he moved to Boca Raton, Florida, and opened up a restaurant. And every now and then, he would come back to New York just to see me. And
so, what about the forces, the battles, behind the scenes that we never get to know about it?
The kitchen is everybody's temperamental. People are always under pressure. The competition between cooks is great. Everybody wants to shine. Everybody wants to be the shining star. They want the boss to see what they did. Everybody wants to be better than the executive chef. Everybody wants to compete with you for knowledge and show the boss that they can do this better, they can do that better. And it's a lot of pressure. Eventually I realized, you know what? It doesn't matter to me if they're better than me. I'm here to organize them. And the better people that I hire, the better I look. So eventually I started hiring people who knew a lot more than me. I could learn from them. And then, the boss would come in and see all these fancy parties that we were pushing out and all these special meals that we were pushing out. And he would be like, you organized well, you hired well. That's what I paid you for. I didn't pay you to stand behind the range.
Yeah, that's a good leadership principle in any group. I know that, sometimes anybody in any field, even being a pastor, you can be insecure. But your goal isn't to be the center of everything. Your goal is to mature the people in the church, right? And so if you hire people or put people in leadership positions that do that better than you, then you're actually a better pastor. And it takes humility to do so, a little bit at least.
I learned a lot of humility working with some men that were much better than me. But I also learned that being the under-rower sometimes is more satisfying. We hear Paul talk about the under-rower. And if I could raise up guys to be leaders, I was happy with that. I was happy because I was giving them a career, a life. I was giving them something,
So, let's center back, like swing it back to, your faith as a child, obviously, very influenced by your parents' conversion, at least into, the independent church, and not necessarily the Catholic Church, and your father's, finding his Messiah. And so I know as kids, for me as teenagers, there was influence, but, I still was living in my parents' home. But so once you're involved in the craziness and the pride and the battle and the notoriety and the salaries and all this, how did your faith work through that or your struggles? I mean, you can be completely honest.
That became a struggle with my faith because all of a sudden you go for the shiny things. The boss would give you a large bonus. Or at one point, bought me a car, and you start to become part of the world, and you start to forget the teachings. You start to forget what the Bible is all about. And it took me to actually fall, and I mean fall, we call it backsliding as a Christian, so far back that I lost everything. My wife moved here, Corpus. I was involved with a business in New York, and the partners, we had a disagreement. I lost my car, my house, everything. I was completely, and I remember two things as special. One is I remember being out and about at about 2 o'clock in the morning and just sitting on the stoops of a church, and I didn't even know what kind of church it was, crying out to Jesus that I wanted to get back. And then I knew these people that were going to a church, and they kept telling me about this pastor. Oh, this guy is great. This guy is superb. So they introduced me to him, and I said, maybe we can go out one day, have lunch together. We did. And I told him my whole story, and he knew I had lost everything. My wife was here, and everything, I gave him everything. And I said, I want to get back to walking with Christ. I want to be back to where I was when I was 18, 19, 20. I want to get back to that life. And I thought he was going to say something profound, because everybody told me that this guy he just had this. And I thought he was going to say something really profound. And he just said, you will, but it's not going to be the way you think. And that was it. The next thing I know, turn of events, here I am, Corpus Christi, Texas, reconciling with my wife. But then at the same time, something else was going on. We opened up a little business, and the first person I met was a gentleman from our church, Rocky Luna. We started talking about the Bible, Jesus, Calvary Chapel. And he would bring in guys like Eric Botello, and we'd talk the same subjects. And then one day a gentleman came in to try to sell me television time. And that was Grant. It's the same talk. Everything led to Calvary Chapel. And then another gentleman came in to sell me radio time. But he was the one that struck me. All the while, God was telling me where I had to go. But I wasn't hearing it. I was listening, but I wasn't hearing it. And his name was Rene Hernandez. And he would come in and we would sit and talk. And even if I didn't buy any radio time from him, he would just come in and we'd sit and talk. We talked Bible. We talked just Jesus and then Calvary Chapel. It got to the point where I realized that God was calling me here to Calvary Chapel. Calvary Chapel helped my reconciliation with my wife. As a matter of fact, we received a lot of counsel from you and from Pastor Fab. And I would say, right now, my marriage is at its pinnacle. So if you asked me 5 years ago if I was going to be where I am, that pinnacle of the marriage, no. I would say, no, it's not going to work out. But yet, it's one of the best. And then I'm working and working. We sell a restaurant. I go to work. at the county as a corrections officer, and I kind of loved the job. And then I got sick. During COVID, I got very ill. And, of course, I couldn't go back to the job. The job wouldn't let me go back because I lost about 35% of my lung function. And I distinctly remember the Lord telling me, don't worry about how you're going to survive. I'll take care of that. But I want you to work for me.
Yeah, so talk a little bit, because you made a pretty smooth transition from New York to Corpus to Walking Strong with the Lord, but just the battle, that we were able to watch and walk through with you, with your pride versus, wanting God to bless you in a worldly way, which has always drawn you away, and what God had to do to get your eyes off the worldly things so you can completely rely upon Him.
The best way I could describe that is when you come to the end of yourself, you come to the beginning of Christ. When you realize that nothing else is worth it, you can have zero, nothing, no possession, no car, no home. It doesn't matter. What matters is Christ. That is the only thing that matters. And then all of a sudden you put Christ as your focus in life. And He surprises you. He gives you everything you need. He supplies it. I cannot ever go back to not believing the way I did, because I know what believing is, and I know what He does. The struggles, the nights of crying, the nights of tears, battling with my wife, battling with people here at church, because I used to hate when people would say the expression, wait on the Lord. Until I waited on the Lord and He appeared. Now I tell that to other people. It's going to happen. Just wait on the Lord. Trust me. I've been there. I've had that battle. It's the hardest thing in the world to do.
So, from my perspective, and, I went, and you guys had gone through a divorce, and I went and remarried you in your pizza restaurant.
Yep.
And you gave me a gift of a full-size pizza. My goodness, one piece fills you up, right? One time I asked you, how can you eat? I saw you eating a piece of like Pizza Hut pizza, and I go, how can you even eat this after being this expert on pizza and everything? But anyways, we all kind of watched, and your idea of God's blessing was basically only monetarily, right? And so you really fought against that so much to where you were really frustrated with God. And Maria went back to Mexico for a while,
yes.
And we didn't see you for a while. And it's funny because very often people always tell me, as a pastor, they go, thank you for not giving up on me. And sometimes I'll tell them, I go, no, I did. God didn't. I'm always open to watching people come back. But there was a point for about 6 months that we really did not see you. And obviously we still loved you. We wanted you to do well. People were still reaching out to you. We get little reports here and there, Alan's frustrated or angry. And then all of a sudden, and I don't know how God drew you back. Like, so Maria was in Mexico. You're kind of frustrated and trying to get by and everything. And we didn't see you for 6 months. Is there something specific that you can talk about that kind of drew you back during that time?
I would have to say God Himself, Jesus. I felt His warmth. I felt His message. And I knew that He was telling me, you have to come back to me. If you come back to me, everything is going to be okay. That doesn't mean you're going to have a big house, fancy cars. No, what it means is you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. You're going to feel whole again. And a lot of nights of crying, a lot of nights of actual just sitting there and praying out to God from my heart. And God answering.
Mm-hmm. So you come back to the church. Maria moves back from Mexico. And now you're whole again.
Yeah.
And you're going through the process of, being discipled, as it were, and meeting with you guys as a couple. And I think we watched both of you give up so many things that were like Klingons of the world. They were still stuck on you, and we were watching you kind of give up on those things. And then it was interesting because we had a prayer ministry. Every Tuesday morning and Tuesday evening, 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., we'd get together for prayer. And so what led you to start being a part of that?
Well, Maria prompted me the first time to go. And I went to the first 6 a.m. prayer meeting. And I walked out of there feeling rejuvenated, fresh, renewed, that I couldn't wait to go back at night for the 6 p.m. prayer meeting. And I think I did it consistently over the years. I don't think I missed any. I stayed. Sometimes it was just me and you in the morning or at night. And it was I realized that prayer doesn't change God. Prayer changes me.
Right. C.S. Lewis.
Yeah. And I don't pray because of who I am. I pray because of who he is.
Right.
And it's an open dialogue. I realize through prayer, I have an open dialogue with God. And I just enjoyed it. I enjoyed it and felt the strength through it and encouraged other people to do it. And then I started doing my men's Bible study regularly. I joined a bunch of other groups here at the church. I think about 4 or 5 years ago, I started one of the Conquer groups, with one of the Conquer groups, that all of us are now leaders in the 7 pillars. And we used to come to the monthly prayer. We used to come to the prodigal prayer. And everything just snowballed. I just kept going and going and going,
And eventually you started leading one of our home groups as well. And
yes, I lead one of our koinonia groups, and it happens to be the largest group in the church. We have around 40 people. So we don't meet at home. We meet here at the church. And it's just that group, we've been together, and we do life together. We go to each other's houses. We go places together. We'll go to movies together. We'll barbecue together. That group is a big family. Is a big sub-family of the church family.
So what do you feel about, the importance of community? I mean, that's a term that you put quotes around. It can mean a lot of different things. But as far as the importance, right? Because now we have mega superstore kind of churches and multiple campuses type things, but obviously community is very important to you. So speak on that a little bit.
Well, 2 things. I think the church has to do life together, because that becomes keeps you from straying. It also keeps the enemy. The enemy likes to go after the lone wolf. The enemy likes to go after that lost sheep. But if you're in a bunch, the enemy knows he doesn't have the strength to get you when you in that bunch. But when you stray from that bunch and you become the lone lost sheep, it's easy for him to put ideas in your head. It's easy for him to change the way you think. But if you stay with that group, the group stays together, it's hard for him to do that. Because if you do have the wrong idea, that's why the Conquer groups and the 7 pillars, you have accountability to your brothers. And the same thing, our K group has accountability to each other.
Yeah. So back to the prayer, we pray probably 5 years together.
Easy.
Just consistent, right?
Consistently.
So then, if you don't know, my wife got very sick for about a year, and I wasn't able to make it to those meetings. And lo and behold, there you are, leading those meetings.
It happened organically. It just happened organically. And along with that, as it happened, and you weren't here, I felt a couple of things. One, I felt that you entrusted me to run this ministry. But I also felt that God had put me in the position to run the ministry. He was leading up to that. That was his long-term plan that I couldn't see 5 years ago, but I see it now. I see that long-term plan now. And as you know, I've taken that ministry and I've expanded it to parents' prayer night for our youth, to youth prayer nights for our youth ministry. And then we've done many other things.
Radio. Prayer.
We do prayer time on KSGR. And we're going to expand that soon too. Matt and I are working on expanding that. Mm-hmm. So I just said, I felt in my heart, you entrusted me with it, and the Lord is telling me this is what I've been grooming you for all these years.
Mm-hmm. And sometime during that time, you ended up coming on staff. I got a phone call, and it's like, well, we need this guy. And again, I was only here on Sundays and Wednesdays teaching, but other than that, I was just taking care of my wife at home, and I get a phone call. I think we need Alan on, to bring him on, on staff. And it's interesting because a church our size, we got a guy, and you do so many other things and teach in so many different areas, but you are a prayer minister, a prayer pastor, as it were, which is such a blessing. And I didn't hesitate. I'm like, oh yeah, this is what we need to do.
And I love being on staff, and I can tell you, after service, I'm here every service, right? After service, I get people coming up to me handing me a slip of paper. Can you pray for me? And I get prayer requests, if not weekly, daily, from our congregation, because they know that, and can you pray for me? Can you have the prayer team pray for me? I need this. Can you pray for my sister, my father, my uncle? And I have a whole folder upstairs of people that have given me requests to pray for them.
Nice. So, it's interesting. So I'm from Southern California, right? So if you're from Southern California, you think the only place that exists is Southern California, and you're the one with the perfect accent because that's how all the movies are made, with a California accent and everything. And, everybody, like, back to the whole idea of peculiar people. And, you're this big Italian. I've seen pictures of you younger. You could have starred in a lot of movies as the Italian thug, just this big, strong Italian and everything, and your accent, the strength of your accent and everything, and so it was just surprising for me to spend some extended amount of time with you, and then to hear the different areas that you were studying. So I underestimated, your I guess your spiritual IQ or whatever, and then, found out that you went to school but beyond that, you're just a studier.
Yeah. I love studying. I can spend 4 or 5 hours a day in scriptures because you never learn enough about it. You can read it. You can read one verse 10 times, and 10 times you get something different. All this. And then my latest venture is starting Bible college, and hopefully getting a degree in theology.
And I always say the interesting thing about formal study is it's going to do one of two things. It's going to make you prideful because you know more than other people. But if you're learning it right, it can also make you extremely humble because you start understanding that the knowledge that you have and even the knowledge you gained is really nothing in the amount of things that can be known about God and theology and how massive he truly is. And so I think if you do education right, you realize that you grow in the knowledge of your own ignorance, which is good. But it also makes you more excited about the Lord because you realize there's a whole ball of information out there that you have no idea of, and so as you move forward, just encourage you, be humbled by what you're learning as opposed to too prideful. Yeah.
And I take that advice to heart. And something you told me when I first told you I wanted to go to Bible college, you said you will be surprised at how much you already know.
Yes. And that just, you love God's word, you get to know a lot of things. You go to school and you learn the fancy names attached to those things, which doesn't always help. But the idea of just getting to know God better is always good. So right now in your life, just recently you had some surgery?
Yes. Out of nowhere, I couldn't walk. I woke up one day and I couldn't walk. And I went to the emergency room. They wanted to operate on me right there. And then I went to see a bone specialist, and he said, I have to get you in the hospital now. Otherwise, you might permanently be paralyzed. Mm-hmm. And I'm right now in the process of rehabilitating, learning how to walk again.
Mm-hmm. And God's even using that. I would say, at least the way you told us, that he's especially using that in your wife's life.
Yes.
Right.
It's taught her how to be a biblical wife, 100%. And the biggest lesson there is taught me how to love my wife as Christ loved the church. Mm-hmm. The more she has become a biblical wife, the more I love her like Christ loves the church. And I just know that I'll walk alone again, be able to walk without using any assistance again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. All right, is there anything as we start to wrap up that you'd like to say or talk about or bring up?
I just would tell people, Jesus, we read the Bible and there's all these, he has all his parables and everything, but go to the simple. When he first called Peter, he just said 2 words, follow me. Peter's answer was simple, I will. And later on, again, Jesus simplistically just says, trust me. Trust me. If you can just follow him and trust him, everything else falls into place.
All right. With a lot of peculiar details. It's amazing the manifest ways God can work with us. Well, anyways, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. And so
thank
you, Alan, for sharing that with us.
And I love Christ, I love God, and I love coming to work every day.
Yeah, that's beautiful. All right. Well, God bless you, and we'll see you all soon. Bye.